With Dunkin' Go-Tos, you can get a great deal on two of your favorites, like 2 egg and cheese wraps for $2, 2 bagels with cream cheese spread for $4, and 2 bacon, egg, and cheese croissants for $5. In my opinion, it's a deal that's pretty tough to beat. That's just if you want my go-to cents. If you don't want my go-to cents, it's go too late. Dunkin' Go-Tos, a great deal for $2, $4, or $5. America runs on Dunkin'. Participation may vary. Limited time offer. Exclusions apply.
But right now, senior analyst and commentator at CNBC, the brilliant and the very nice man, Ron Insana. Good morning to you, Ron.
Good morning, gentlemen. How you doing?
Well, it's one of those days, Ron. It's a somber day, as you know, and you have a wild tale. You've been telling it for, since 9/11, but every time you tell it, again, it just it hammers home what kind of day it was that day, how many people died, but how many people had close calls like you?
Yeah, and I've seen some of the commentary on social media over the last couple of days, and one of the striking things is how everyone remembers the perfect weather on September 11th, 2001 in Manhattan. It was one of the most clear, bright, vibrant mornings we'd seen in such a long time. And within a matter of minutes, all that changed. I was having breakfast in Midtown Manhattan with a couple of hedge fund guys talking about the financial markets, and really no one had anything else on their minds that morning but what was going on in stocks. If you remember, the internet bubble had burst, and so we were sitting around just shooting the breeze, really, and a guy at the next table told me that both planes had already hit the towers. And so I got into a cab, I excused myself, and was driven down towards the World Trade Center, and just randomly, a producer from MSNBC, John Zito, had called in sick that day but was heading towards the towers as well, called me out on the street, and the two of us got through the police lines with our media IDs, and we were trying to make it from the east side of the towers to the west side. Both had been hit, and we were looking up at the towers trying to figure out how on earth, in addition to all the other things that were going on, they could possibly put out fires that were too high off the ground but too far beneath the tops of the towers to do anything about. And as we got within a half block, the south tower came down, and we saw a huge piece of the tower fall off, a huge plume of smoke blow out, and we turned and ran down the street. I made a right around the corner. John kept running straight, and as I looked over my shoulder to see where he was going, that cloud started to roll. I squatted down next to a parked car to protect myself, and it went black in an instant. And it turns out, rather strangely, that car door was unlocked, and I crawled in the back of that car waiting to see what was going to happen, in that blackness. And it was, it was the maybe single most profound personal and professional moment I've ever had.
Wow, CNBC's Ron Insana. So at the time, before that, I lived in Riverdale in the Bronx at a building, Bernie, the Century Building. And I had this really good friend, his name was Ari. And every Sunday morning, there's a basketball court in that building. We would go downstairs and play basketball. He died that day, and his wife is one of the young ladies that ABC actually had on a couple of weeks later because she was pregnant, 9 months pregnant, with their first child. And anyway, make a long story short, you mentioned stocks that morning. You're actually lucky on 2 counts, Ron. First of all, that you were able to escape when you got there. Secondly, I know you know this, but a lot of the big-time brokers, my buddy Ari, for example, was a trader, and he worked on Bond Street. A lot of the big-time brokers that morning were up at the World Trade Center's restaurant, Windows on the World, for this massive stock breakfast. And a lot of your colleagues must have gotten killed that day because some of my friends did, and they were stockbrokers.
Yeah, we lost a lot of friends. As you know, and as you remember, Cantor Fitzgerald, which was a very large bond and stock trading firm, was on the floor that the first plane hit, and almost the entire firm was wiped out. And we had several friends who worked there at the time, and Keefe, Bruyette and Woods, which was a banking analyst company. Again, a lot of friends and frequent CNBC visitors were in that space. And, it's ironic, too, that my wife was 8 weeks pregnant with my second child, with my son. And she was taking a walk. She had no idea what had happened. She had no idea that I was down there. And I was kind of out of communication for a couple hours. So there's a front page story in the New York Post about those kids who never met their dads, who died that morning, or their mothers for that matter. And, that's still, in many ways, one of the most poignant parts about this, that there are these children who are, going to be born within a matter of weeks or months who just never knew their fathers or their mothers, and the loss of life to nearly 3,000 people. And I'll tell you, that morning, that day, we thought it was going to be a lot more. I remember being on NBC, and I was talking to Matt and Katie and Tom on the Today Show, and Tom Brokaw was there, and at the end of the day, he and I were talking, and we thought, because of the capacity of the two towers, that as many as 20,000 people had died.
Yep.
But it was just a little too early, as bad as it was. If the plane had hit after 9 o'clock or significantly after 9, we would have lost so many more.
CNBC's Ron Insana, of course, escaped death at down at 9/11 Ground Zero on September 11, 2001. Ron, to further your story, you got out. You're in the car. The cloud passes. You get out, and you mentioned you were on the Today Show a little bit later. What did you do? Walk up to 30 Rock, or how'd you get up there?
No, it went from being pitch black, and I'll tell you that there are certain memories, obviously, that are always going to be seared in someone's mind, and the depth of the blackness. And the one thing I don't remember is the sound, because it was so overwhelmingly loud as the buildings were coming down. But as it turned from pitch black to gray, I went into a building that the car was parked in front of, and there were a bunch of New York police officers in there and some other people. Still don't remember exactly which building it was. And a woman said, "Wash your face off," because I was, as you guys recall, covered in a fair amount of dust and debris. And the police decided to move uptown, and so I got into a car with them. We picked up 2 injured people along the way, one of whom who had a cut head, another had shrapnel in I believe, his arm. And we drove up to Midtown, and from there I walked over to NBC. And that morning, Jack Welch had just retired. It was his second day in retirement. He was on the Today Show, and I bumped into him on the way into NBC headquarters, and he asked me what had happened. He gave me a hug and left. I went in to see Andy Lack, who is then and now the president of NBC News, and he just threw me on the set, on the Today Show set, so that I could tell folks what I had seen and what the environment looked like down there, which was, as I described it at the moment, kind of like a nuclear winter. It was gray. There was ash everywhere, paper flying all over the place.
Usually when you're on this show, you're talking about the markets around the world, the economy. If not, on a much lighter note, congratulations to you and God rest his soul, Tim Russert, on the big Buffalo Bills win over the New York Jets on Sunday.
Yes.
But, for all of the talk that goes on about trade wars with China, it seems like every phone call, every tweet, every little thing can really adjust the markets these days, and sometimes in very depressing fashion. I don't remember, Ron, but right after 9/11, I would have to think that the markets were in shambles for a long time. No, I mean that there had to be such insecurity around the world.
Well, yeah, and if we move through that week, there were really serious questions about how badly southern Manhattan was damaged and how physically the market could be reconstructed. Remember, there weren't really many redundant operations for the New York Stock Exchange, which was effectively shut down for a week. Until former Chairman Dick Grasso got together, and he really led the effort to rebuild the physical infrastructure down there so that the market could reopen on Monday. I remember he called me Wednesday morning, the day after 9/11. He said, "When are you going to come down here and interview me?" And I said, "Listen, I can't get down there. I don't have proper credentials." I had actually lost my ID temporarily when I was down there on 9/11. Wow. So he sent a car for me. I went down there and did an interview with Dick on the floor of the exchange the next day.
Wow. And they were really hoping, by the way, they were hoping those buildings didn't crumble to the ground, but fell to the ground and take out all of those financial buildings, including the exchanges. Right?
Well, remember, Seven World Trade had not yet come down.
Right.
And so when I went down to the exchange that Wednesday morning, I was standing with some military and police officers, and we were looking over in that direction. And if it had come down in the way in which it was tilting, it would have wiped out everything from where it stood to Trinity Church to the exchange to effectively, the mouth of the Hudson. And so there were still fears that if that building had fallen sideways, you were going to wipe out a good part of lower Manhattan. So they did manage, one, to take that down in a controlled implosion later on, and the exchange was up and running the following Monday. So Sunday night, everybody was doing special shows, including us, from the exchange, talking about the market reopening the next day. You remember the government had asked a lot of investors and traders not to sell the next day in a patriotic act. At the end of the day, as I recall, the market was down about 700 points, and it was the most quiet, solemn decline I've ever seen in my life. The floor, which typically, erupts during periods of big market moves, everybody, whether they were traders and investors or whether they were journalists, effectively stood shoulder to shoulder that day. The market went down. The market functioned that Monday, which everybody felt was going to be extremely important, because if it opened and failed, it would have created even more uncertainty about where the markets and the economy were headed. Remember, we were still in a bear market that occurred after the bursting of the internet bubble. Yep. So this was another event. Federal Reserve cut interest rates. We had other, ultimately the Bush administration cut taxes. All of that to offset the impact of both the internet bubble bursting and the impact of 9/11. People stayed home for a full 2 weeks across the country. No one went out. They called it the cocooning effect. And for a full month, the U.S. economy effectively came to a standstill.
Wow. Well, the fact that they got the market open is why they called Dick Grasso the Winston Churchill of Wall Street. They got it open that Monday, and it did function, albeit in decline. But listen, Ron Insana, your story is compelling, and we thank you every year for telling
I
it.
remember talking to you guys that week. I don't know if it was Thursday or Friday morning. But I got on with you and Imus and Chuck and the rest of the guys, and we had that conversation, and you were all so gracious, and so I think in many ways comforting to talk to during that period, as I think many of the people in the media were, given the kind of profound nature of what had transpired.
No doubt. 18 years later, we still love you, and you're still doing a fantastic job, and thank you, Ron.
Same back, man.
All right, take care, pal. And Dick Grasso was a guy that I remember we did those shows live from the stock exchange, and Dick was there. And was that during the Radiothon?
We did Radiothons from there and other shows as well.
Yep.
And Dick Grasso was always there. He was the guy who sponsored us. In fact, he had us in. He had Imus in a couple of times to ring the bell.
Yes.
And I was there once, standing up there during the ringing of the bell, believe it or not.
That's awesome.
Dick Grasso, the great guy.